filling in for your missing keynote speaker. I discovered that the slides for this talk got wiped off of our shared Dropbox, and so I recreated them in the last 5 minutes, and here we go. So, sorry to keep you waiting. I was a last-minute realization, and this one is much shorter. It's about 20 minutes long. This is a brief overview of ways to think about projects, products, and how they relate, how to go from one to the other, what the difference really is, and so on and so forth. So, I just want to hammer in that everyone is the hero of their own life story, a unique, special, never-before-seen snowflake, but people behave in ways that are predictable in the aggregate. And if you've ever dealt with any sort of scale, an application, for example, that has hundreds of users, as few as hundreds of recurring users, you can find in your analytics trends across all of them. And you can notice that if you change small things, people react in, on average, predictable ways. And that's because, given a similar type of human with a similar input, you often get a similar output. I've been to 30 to 40 hackathons, and I've dealt with your crowd a lot. And I just want to hammer in that you have no idea how derivative your idea is, and that I've probably heard it before. And that's not a bad thing. That's not automatically a bad thing. That's maybe a bad thing if you're thinking that this idea is going to be a great product, in which case I'm probably able to pop your bubble. But it's not the worst thing if you think that your idea would make for a great project. In my mind, the difference between the two is the focus. A project is something you do for you. A product is something you do for the end user. And as a result, you are not allowed to optimize for certain things when building a product that you would be able to optimize for if you're working on a project. Every weekend, I get approached by hackers who say, I have this amazing new idea. And then they kind of get a little bit deflated when they're like, oh, you heard that before? Last week? Really? Every weekend in this country, there are students working on building textbook exchanges. Every weekend in this country, there are students working on building apps to find people with like-minded interests around you. Location-based, for instruments, for homework, for everything. People come up with a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again. And some of it is kind of the same version of silly ideas, okay, so it's an app for if you're at the same party or bar as someone, and then you can message them if you see that they're there, because people at parties totally like being approached by people who are too shy to talk to them face to face and want to be pinged in an app. Yeah. But I get these kinds of ideas all the time. And what happens is, as young programmers and as young hackers with a window of the world that is college students, you sometimes don't have the perspective for what has been tried before, and sometimes why certain things may be good or bad ideas. And I gave you a quick hint at it in the opening talk, which is that most of the world is between the ages of 24 and dead, and also they have all the money, and college students are broke, and actually have much less time than you give them credit for. How many times would you, busy, crazy college students spending a weekend at hackathons, be like, oh, it is a random 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. I'm going to open an app and see if I can meet new people I don't know to totally not have sex with them and just be friends, right? That basically never happens. The only impulse that so far has predictably driven people at random hours of the day to open apps to meet new people is the desire to sleep with them, and beyond that, basically nothing else is quite broken into that space, right? And it's because y'all are busy, right? You don't have time to figure out on a Saturday afternoon if people you don't know also want to go rock climbing, and stuff like that. But all these things that I'm tacitly dissing might make for great project ideas. A project is optimized for you, for learning, for fun. You're allowed to make something hyper-derivative. You're allowed to make something that already exists. Heck, Lyft and Uber exist, but two years ago at hackathons, I used to get approached by students who were making on-campus ride-sharing networks, left and right. And some of them even operated, and some of them even continue to operate in college towns where Uber and Lyft are not yet existing, right? One of my alums built a really, really simple app that shows a leaderboard of who has attended sports games at his high school. And it's just a fan tracking app. You check into sports games, simple as that. Kind of derivative, kind of been done. awesome project and turned out to be popular inside of his high school. Great. For a project, you're allowed to do things that delay your progress. You're allowed to say, Firebase is cool, but I'm going to write my own backend deploy to Linode. It takes more time, but I'm going to learn more, right? You're allowed to do it in a technology you don't know because you just want to learn that technology. You're allowed to work with APIs that do cool things because you want to see the cool things that APIs do. That is all okay. The thing that you should not get too hung up on is trying to treat an environment like this one as if it were a business plan competition, because it's not. And so the thing that pains me sometimes is to see amazing hackathon projects that do cool things where the student has kind of deluded themselves into thinking that like this is solving some great world problem. Like, you know, obviously one of the chief drivers of inequality in our world is high textbook prices, right? I was being sarcastic. I mean, there's a lot more problems than textbook prices, but maybe the app is like super awesome and super slick and taught them a lot while they were building it, and that's great. So not everything has to be your startup, not everything has to be your product. A project is something you do for you. And it's okay to keep it that way. And sometimes it's a project turns into a great product, that's okay. But don't get too hung up on this. Now, if the thing you want to learn is how to build good products, then your project that you use to learn that ought to be optimized for that purpose. Which means, well, if Firebase is faster, maybe you should use Firebase. Maybe you should use the language you're more comfortable with. You'll learn less, but you'll get it done faster, right? So there is a time when the thing you want to learn is how to build products, and that's a good productive exercise, but then you have to realize you are no longer the focus. If you want to know how to build a good product, you have to build something that people want. You have to launch the darn thing and see if people actually want it. You have to be introspective and humble about whether or not this is truly solving a problem that people have, whether anyone will take time out of their busy day to try the thing that you're building. A really good benchmark that we give people when we talk to them about building products, we ask, is this remarkable? And our definition of remarkable is, will a user take time out of their day to show it to someone else? You don't have $1 million marketing budget. You don't even have a $1 marketing budget. You have negative free time, you're a college student. Your only way of competing is building something that deeply fulfills a need or that is remarkable, or both. Things can be remarkable because they're controversial. Things can be remarkable because they're hilarious. Things can be remarkable because they're so useful for your community. That app for that high school, checking sport attendance, people shared inside of that high school, so it was remarkable for that high school. When you build a product, you iterate on it because it fulfills the needs of the people you're targeting. You don't iterate on it because you get excited about it, right? And that means being a slave to your users sometimes. That means that your partner who wants to rewrite the whole backend in Go because that's something a cool idea, or who thinks that Rails is the wrong religion and needs to convert to Node.js, none of that shit matters when you're building a product. What matters is, what is the easiest path to building something that people want, okay? So if your project is meant to teach you or stroke your passion or desires for something that is purely engineering related, don't get too hung up about whether it's a good startup idea. Build it in cool languages, do fun stuff. If your goal is to either build something successful or learn how to build successful things, then you need to start to be thinking about products, and you start to be thinking about end users who are most often not people like you. It still doesn't have to be your startup. If you look at the number of products in the world that come from startups, they're truly in the minority, right? My co-founder back in the day made a really fun, simple game and sold $30,000 worth of copies. That was an incredible life-changing experience for a 16-year-old, which he was at the time, right? You can't fund a company with 30K. If Electronic Arts, if Blizzard launched a game that made 30K, that's like how much they spend on salaries in like a day. So it's okay that his thing wasn't the next big game company startup, but it was a great product that made users happy and had some measure of success, right? So even when you are trying to build a cool product, it doesn't have to be a great startup idea. It doesn't have to have the potential to take over the world and grow virally. Maybe it's the kind of thing that like solves a need for a certain kind of person, and there's 1,000 people who will love it a lot and will pay $1 a month to use it. Maybe you put it in the Mac App Store for free or for $5 and it just makes a passive stream of income. It does not have to be your startup. This talk was inspired by a really, really awesome guy who met me at a hackathon 2 years ago and said, I need to tell you about the 16 startups that I'm running. I was like, say what? 16 startups. Turns out, by his definition, every side project he was doing was a startup. And I explained to him that in the Valley, he would kind of get like, people would be like, oh, noob, you know? Like you're kind of identifying yourself as someone who doesn't really know what they're doing if you say that you have 16 startups. A startup is all-consuming. A startup is your life. If you have a startup, you only have one. If you're Jack Dorsey, you have two, Twitter and Square. And people think that's weird and like maybe a really bad idea. And you're not Jack Dorsey anyway, so it doesn't matter. Right? You only have one. You can have a few products you launch. People will launch a few products. You can have many projects. Right? I have projects that are purely for fun, games I like to make, stuff like that. Never going to be necessarily good products. And I want you to just keep in mind that, again, this is not a business plan competition, and to not get too hung up in these things. If you commit to building a product, you must go through an ideation process that takes into account nothing about what you care about in terms of the process of building it. Nothing has to do with the language you want to use. All has to do with the user you want to fulfill, the user you want to satisfy. So, now let's say you have a project. Jeremy, my project might be a product. How do I know the difference? It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. But also, the first prerequisite to something being a product is to launch it. And this is the easy disqualifier. If this is a thing that you are never going to launch to people who are not you and your close circle of friends, then it cannot be a product, ever. I want to remind you that this is Twitter when it launched. Okay? Like, for reals, this is like the actual screenshot from what Twitter looked like. Does this look like Twitter today? Obviously not. Could this have stayed as a side project that they didn't want to launch because it looked too shitty? Probably. Did they shamelessly decide to launch it and people start using it? Yes. Just launch the darn thing. It's the easiest way to know. Maybe your project has broad appeal. You'll launch it. It's also the easiest way to get a reality check. If you've been working for 6 months on your brilliant idea that is still pre-launch, then reality hasn't had a chance to smack you in the face and say nobody wants this. Right? So, if you have a project and you're not sure, and my talk is not giving you enough information to truly know if it's a project or product, it shouldn't. My talk is here to tell you, if you want it to be a project, optimized for yourself. If you want it to be a product, you must launch it, and really, it'll be obvious from there. I also want you to know that when you're building a product, don't get too caught up in the feedback you get from others, who are your peers, or not necessarily your target audience. And I've seen it go both ways. Some people read all the startup blogs, read the Y Combinator publications, Paul Graham, all these people from the Silicon Valley, and they know that apps like Twitter got laughed out of the room in the early days. I mean, come on. You show up, you say, hey, I'm a venture capitalist. This is Jack Dorsey right here. By the way, the second photo looks kind of like angsty teen, not really CEO professional. And you're Jack, and you come in, you say, this Twitter thing, 140 character thing, you know, messages, give me money. People are like, yeah, no. So people know about this and sometimes confuse the fact, they're like, oh my gosh, everyone tells me my product idea sucks and that I'm crazy. It must mean I'm onto something. Because all the successful people were also told that they were crazy. If everyone's telling you you're crazy, you're probably crazy, to be honest. At the same time, no one can really predict this. Because people would have told Twitter they were crazy, at the end of the day it took off. Let's take a look at another one. Who's Bourbon? No, it's not Airbnb.
Instagram.
Instagram.
Oh, wow. No.
This is early Instagram.
Wow.
So they stopped trying to make bourbon a thing. Bourbon is not going to happen. Nobody says that. Hey, you bourbon? not a thing. But this was the early Instagram. Like what? Right? So this gives you an idea. This was a product that sucked, But